We've discovered the human genome only very recently. In just a couple of decades, science has told us a lot, but it's limited at telling us only what it can prove through laboratory experiments. Natural philosophy doesn't work like that. It can ask from all that we know, from what we can reason about, what must be true, even what may be true. I began this natural philosophy series of videos by asking what concepts are we missing that we need. In video 2, I traced those missing concepts to the genome. In video 3, I detected the genome impacting every aspect of our lives. In this video, I turn to the genome itself, asking how much can reason and reasonable speculation applied to the genome tell us about what remain our greatest mysteries about life on Earth and about ourselves. In this video, mysteries involving life on Earth. I warn you, be prepared for me to use reason and speculation where we actually know very little. This is a method of natural philosophy that, with the rise of science reductionism, has become unfamiliar. Its focus is, from everything we know and experience, what must or may be true. This makes demands on both of us. The task I've set myself is, by the end of this video, to make plausible a new theory and mechanism of evolution. Your task that you must undertake from the beginning is to prepare yourself for some of your most deeply held assumptions to be challenged. If you don't welcome that, you won't find this video acceptable. The genome. Every cell in your body comes with a copy. If you took the individual molecules it consists of, straightened them out and joined them end to end, you'd have a single molecule 6 feet long. How much information could a molecule like that hold? It's made up of over 3 billion molecular units of 4 different kinds that can act like letters of a 4-letter alphabet. Imagine a necklace like that, made up of 4 different color beads strung 8 to an inch. Written in terms of those beads, the US Constitution would stretch about 100 yards. Today's fastest runner can cover that distance in about 10 seconds. By comparison, as a necklace like that, your genome would stretch for 6,000 miles from New York to Tokyo in Japan, a dozen hours travel by air. That's an indication of the vast amount of information a genome could contain. What else can we say about the genome? How smart is it? Presumably it has enough smarts for its creatures to have the smarts they come with, like spiders being able to spin their webs. In video 3, from examples like that, I found the genome to be smart about space, time, gravity, shape, symmetry, number, creativity, even emotions. In the description, I'll post a link to that section of the video. It's an extraordinary range of talents. Show us, you might ask. If the genome is so smart, show us. And I'll point to the development of a single-celled human embryo. Drawing on the genome within it, that single cell divides and grows into the 30 trillion cells of an adult human being, each one carrying a copy of that same genome. The growing creature has to be told what kinds of cells to make, where and when, to end up with a normal-looking one of us. And we're each pretty perfect, aren't we? With our noses in the right place and our eyes symmetrical on the 2 sides of our head. conjured up in a pretty predictable time of 9 or so months. Nice piece of manufacture. How can you account for such a seeming miracle? No problem, I was told. It involves nothing more than a succession of chemical elements, each one acting as the springboard for the next. From 1 cell to 3 million? I don't think so. Halfway along, what tells each cell what to do? Most won't contain even a single molecule more complex than water from the original cell. What each of them does have from that cell is a copy of the original genome. That alone is present to direct the entire process from start to finish. What else is there? That's a measure of how smart a genome can be. How does a genome marshal its smarts to manage such an awesome task? Can it think? A mere molecule, you may think that's ridiculous. But our brains are made of molecules, yet we can think. And our brains are fashioned for us in detail by our genome. At birth, we have all the neurons we'll ever have. From them, as they mature, mind just develops. It was there in our genome all along. Could the genome do that? Create our minds, if it had no kind of a mind of its own? What else do we know? Genomes have been evolving for far longer than Homo sapiens' brains have, around 10,000 times as long. And a genome's been living, copied alive from generation to generation for 4 billion years, while each of us develops a brain in just a couple of decades. We've very little basis for denying the genome any mental capability we find in ourselves. Suppose a genome can think. What must happen when it thinks? Maybe what happens in us when we think. We meet someone and want to remember their name. We repeat it to help us remember it. The name gets registered somehow in our brains, in brain chemistry, in a physical form. Later, when we need that name again, we can query that brain chemistry to recall it. We bring it back to mind. What must happen for the genome to think like that? First, to think at all, it must have a mind, something like ours. Then it must have a brain to support thinking, and where thoughts can be stored in memory, in physical form. But that physical form can only be the chromosomes it consists of, with its creature's genes spelled out along it. Now, a genome can recall from its brain, from its creature's genes, one of its characteristics, have second thoughts about it, and restore the changes back to the corresponding gene location. But it's by its genes that we define a species. So just by thinking, a genome can bring new species into existence. That may seem pure fantasy, but remember, we do that all the time, swapping our thoughts between our minds and our brains. Then, just by thinking, a genome can bring new species into existence. Hey presto, a new mechanism of evolution. Turns out, evolution has to involve not only living creatures like us, but also our genomes. They have to evolve first before they can create us. I anticipate that I will have challenged your assumptions. Too great a challenge, and you can simply dismiss what I've said as fantasy. But I suggest instead you go back and check my claims one by one, and see to what extent each one holds up. Probably you will reject my proposal because it defies today's consensus theory of evolution, the modern synthesis of Darwin's natural selection and Ronald Fisher's genetic mutation. But when I review those mechanisms, spelled out in steps, as I've just spelled out my theory, they seem highly unreasonable. You can judge this by referring to 3 videos in this channel. I'll link to them in the description. Having a choice between a mechanism of evolution like mine, involving mind, and Darwin's natural selection has enormous consequences. Natural selection is a purely physical process. Anything made by a purely physical process will also be purely physical. Accepting that about ourselves provides support for the claim of physicalism, pure materialism, that everything, including us, everything we do and think, is purely physical, is determined in advance by physical laws. Mind must be purely physical, and consciousness and free will, if they appear to defy physics, can only be illusions. If, for you, consciousness and free will are not illusions, if they're real and, to some degree, independent of physical determinism, then consider opting for a universe in which mind can exist as a separate reality independent of purely physical matter. In such a universe, my suggestion could be the primary mechanism of evolution. Which theory is most likely true? I said just now, genomes had to evolve first before living creatures could. Which mechanism, mine or Darwin's, can best account for that? Let's begin with natural selection. To provide the variation it needs to work on, today it's been paired with genetic mutation, random damage to genes. In that necklace, a bead of one color getting replaced by a bead of a different color, changing what it stands for. Natural selection's job is to identify and conserve any of that damage that's beneficial. So what will make natural selection more efficient? Smaller genomes, so the most improved genes are easier to identify. Large populations offering more choices of variations, and creatures with short generation times where selection can take place more frequently. That would have favored the evolution of creatures like bacteria, small genomes, huge populations, short generation times, new generations in as little as 30 minutes. But with time, all those factors changed in ways that work against natural selection. Genomes got bigger, creatures got larger, and lived in smaller populations. They had fewer progeny in each generation, and time between generations continually increased. Given all these growing impediments, you'd expect to see natural selection slow down and eventually stop. But what happened was the opposite. Evolution started out very slowly. It took billions of years for cells like ours to evolve, another billion for cells like that to join up in multi-celled creatures. Then, more quickly, creatures crawled out of the sea onto the land, animals with backbones appeared, then dinosaurs, mammals, and us, all increasingly rapidly. What that looks like is a process that starts out pretty dumb, like an infant, but gradually goes smarter until, as it matures, it becomes increasingly intelligent and efficient. How evolution actually proceeded favors my kind of explanation involving the evolution of mind over Darwin's purely materialistic account. For almost a lifetime, belief in Darwinism has been official doctrine enforced throughout academia. Challenging it risked losing tenure. It is the only mechanism of evolution that may be taught to children in the school science classroom. It promotes a materialistic point of view. Could this become a huge scientific scandal? What effect has this had on us? Has it made us divert our attention away from natural phenomena that a purely physical mechanism seems unlikely to account for? Has it fostered purely physical analysis of mind and consciousness? Has it led us to expect less out of life, given how mean an account of its origins we've accepted? Has its support for physicalism encouraged us to accept as our due nothing more than mass-produced consumer goods? Is it seeing ourselves as purely physical that's making us feel so vulnerable to progress in artificial general intelligence, AGI, a truly physical intelligence? I suggest we focus instead on what matters most to us, our values. The values we cherish are what matters most to us in the long run, and these have their origin not in what's material around us, but deep in our nature. Values are a precious resource created in the course of genomes evolving over 4 billion years of evolution. That's where we should look for meaning. So, rather than resolve a mystery, the origin of species, I've instead taken the solution we'd all agreed upon, natural selection, and ended up disqualifying it. I am pleased to leave evolution more of a mystery than it was when I found it. Tackling this greater mystery, the role of the genome, I anticipate will lead us to far greater wisdom. In this video, I explored the mystery of evolution. What of the other mystery I promised to tackle, the role of the genome in fashioning our human nature? That I'm leaving to yet another video.